We have some more box office numbers available for Endgame. On the Tuesday just gone, it got a $12.5 million, and for the Wednesday, it has an estimated total of $8.3 million. The Tuesday is a bit weaker than I expected it to be. It's only a 17% increase from the Monday, but the Wednesday is in line with where it would be with a $12.5 million Tuesday. This takes its total US domestic box office to date to $652,806,419, which is the fastest $650 million ever. It's beaten the Force Awakens record by 1 day. And if we look at our chart with Star Wars The Force Awakens, Avatar, Infinity War, Endgame, Jurassic World, and Star Wars The Last Jedi, we can see in green we have Endgame, and it is still in front. So Endgame is still in front of Star Wars The Force Awakens at this point in time, but the last 3 days has had a much smaller box office than the equivalent Star Wars The Force Awakens, and you can see it is moving across to the right. Now that's not so much that Endgame has had a poorer than expected weekday result, it's that Star Wars The Force Awakens just had a ridiculously good weekday result. So the first 2 weeks for Star Wars The Force Awakens, you can see the dark blue line there, it just kind of goes up about the same. So the money just stayed there for 2 weeks for Star Wars The Force Awakens, and that's one of the big reasons why it is the biggest film ever in the US domestic market without inflation. So yes, Endgame earned less money on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday than what it earned on the weekend. That was to be expected. And if you compared it to pretty much any other film, it wouldn't look that bad, but if you just compare it to the dark blue line, it is a bad comparison because Star Wars The Force Awakens just had a ridiculous first 2 weeks in the box office. Now, The Last Jedi was my worst case example here. If Endgame absolutely died after its opening weekend, I said that would be about the worst case it could possibly go. It has earned more money than Star Wars The Last Jedi has earned in total, so that can't happen. And it has just overtaken Jurassic World's total, so it cannot go under the purple line at all, and is very close to the Infinity War total. So it's not quite earned what Infinity War got in its entire run yet, but there's no way it can dip underneath that yellow line. Now, if you look across at the red line, the Avatar line, that's the $760 million that Avatar earned in the US domestic market. It still looks like there's no way it can really go underneath that. Now, it still has a bit to go. It's still got over $100 million from here to go, and $100 million is still a lot of money to earn. But it's just difficult to look at this chart and go, yep, it'll actually dip so severely down at this stage that it'll actually go underneath Avatar. So it really has to still be above the red line and probably a fair bit above the red line. And it's impossible to tell on the chart, but the red line is actually moving up at a steeper line than the green line is now. So the last 3 days, Avatar actually out-earned Endgame, and that is how Avatar got to its $760 million box office total. It didn't just make it all to start, it kept earning money week after week after week after week. So Avatar will get around about another $500 million from where it actually sits right now, which is a huge amount of money to earn after your third week. But you can see how the red line is very different in the angle in which it moves compared to all of these more modern films, where the modern films earn a lot of money in the first 3 days, and then it starts flattening out, whereas Avatar just kept earning money, less money, but kept earning money over and over and over again. And this is not with inflation. So these are all 10-year-old figures for Avatar. This is not the inflation-adjusted Avatar total. So if we look at my predictions, here is just Endgame and Star Wars The Force Awakens. Star Wars The Force Awakens is the blue line, and the green line is Endgame to date, and the red extension over the green lines, that's my predictions for what Endgame will actually do. So you can see the red line and the blue line will basically touch on the Thursday, and on the Friday, they're basically on about the same kind of money. On the Saturday, the blue line will be in front. Okay, not by much, but that's what will actually happen if things go the way they've been going so far. So Star Wars The Force Awakens will start to take the lead over the top of Endgame. It won't be by much in relative terms. You see how the lines are still very, very, very close together here. But at that end point there's about $25 million separating them. So it might not look like $25 million, but because these two films have such a massive amount of money, these two lines looking very close together have still got a very large gap. And that will be at the 25th day, or that'll be at the end of the fourth weekend. So at the end of the fourth weekend, this is where I predict it will be. Endgame will still be very close in relative terms, but Star Wars Force Awakens will be in front, and there's not really any reason to think that Endgame should then take the lead back. So once a film normally overtakes another film, generally they don't then reverse. Something would have to happen like a holiday weekend or some sort of special event, which I don't think it will necessarily happen for Endgame. It's possible if later down the road Endgame is still running and Spider-Man Homecoming, Spider-Man Far From Home is still out, maybe that will get some interest back into Endgame. That's maybe a possibility, but at that stage it won't be earning that much money anyway, even if it is still showing. So I don't think that'll really change what we're looking at here. Endgame's total $2.3 billion doesn't change anything on the non-inflation adjusted world totals. It is still underneath Avatar. It is still the second largest film ever. But if we put inflation on, it is currently the seventh largest film ever in the worldwide box office. It is slightly behind The Sound of Music, about $30 million behind. Although $30 million isn't a slight amount, it is when we're dealing with this kind of money. And it's about $50 million behind E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Now, it may overtake The Sound of Music on Thursday, depending on when the actual international numbers are reported, but it should definitely overtake The Sound of Music on Friday, and it can possibly also overtake E.T. on Friday, again, depending if the international numbers are reported then. So it's possible that Endgame will be the fifth biggest film ever with inflation on Friday. It should really definitely have that by the Saturday. And then once that happens, there's still nothing to look at for a long time. It needs the $2.7 billion to overtake Star Wars A New Hope. It needs $2.7 billion to overtake Avatar without inflation. So we've got a really big gap here. Once it overtakes E.T.'s $2.35 billion, there's not really any other films for us to look at until it gets to $2.7 billion, if it can get to $2.7 billion. And if we look at the foreign inflation-adjusted totals, that is the totals without the US domestic market, Endgame has just overtaken Titanic as the third largest film ever in foreign inflated money, and it is behind Gone with the Wind and behind Avatar. Now, there is a fair bit of variance online if you look at Gone with the Wind's foreign inflation total. It is quite an older film, and some places will calculate it being far bigger than the $1.8 billion. I think that's the best figure to go with, but there are much bigger figures if you look online. Titanic's actually the same. Some places will report that Titanic inflation-adjusted foreign income is over $2 billion. I don't think that's a correct number to use, but nonetheless, it's a very large amount of money. And it is also another problem when we look at all of the foreign money is because of the different amounts that are reported in different places and the different sort of inflation calculations you can make. It's not as good to compare foreign money as it is with the US domestic money, unfortunately. The US domestic money is, there's a good track record of what it is. We've got all the inflation data and so on, so it's very easy to compare films with all of the previous US money. But for the foreign money, it's not quite a like for like in all of the circumstances. And looking forward, we have the fastest to $700 million. A few days ago, I said I don't think Endgame will get that record. I think it will tie with Star Wars The Force Awakens, and I still think that that is true, even though the last few days have been a little bit weaker for Endgame than what I thought they would have been. So if you look at the numbers here, we're currently on the 13th day. This is the Wednesday. If you go down to day 16, that is the Saturday, that's where Force Awakens had $720 million. So that's where it crossed the $700 million mark. 16 days, that is the record. And not only is it the record, there's only two films that have ever done it. So Star Wars The Force Awakens and Avatar are the only two films that have actually earned more than $700 million in the US domestic box office. So if Endgame goes really slowly, which I don't think it will, it'll be third, but I think it'll be the equal first. So you can see here it'll have $711 on the 16th day with my predicted numbers here. It'll have less money than Star Wars The Force Awakens has, but it will still cross to the $700 million mark on that same exact day. Star Wars The Force Awakens took 18 days to get to $750 million, and I think it'll take an extra 2 days to get there for Endgame. And Star Wars The Force Awakens took 23 days to get the $800 million record. I do think Endgame will get to $800 million, but I don't think it'll be able to do it in 23 days. So a last thing that we might be able to look at is, can it earn more money than Avatar earned in the US domestic market with inflation? Without inflation, Avatar got $760 million. And with inflation, its total is $877 million. So can Endgame get more than $877 million? I think it'll be close around that mark. So it may earn more money than Avatar got with inflation, or it may not. But I think that's roughly the kind of total that we're actually looking at right now. Earlier in the week, I said I thought that it would get around about $80 million in the upcoming weekend for Endgame. Now I think it'll be around about $73 million because the rest of the days this week have been a little bit lower than I thought they would have been. Now, some of the predictions for Detective Pikachu for this weekend in the US domestic market are $75 million. So the studio's only saying they expect $50 million over the weekend, but some of the other predictions are $75 million. So if it does get around $75 million, that may be more money than Endgame earns, and Endgame may no longer be the number one film in the US domestic market. But once again, I think we're looking at around about $8 million for Thursday for Endgame. But as usual, we'll have to wait and see what happens. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.